It is Saturday, August 20th, 1 week away from the college football season. You're watching right on Q College Sports.
They're going to kick the field goal. It'll be Jason to Gingell. Out of the hole to Mesco. Good snap, good hold. And the kick is blocked. Appalachian State has stunned the college football world.
Welcome in. That is right. You are watching right on Q College Sports. I'm your host, Tyson Quiller, and thanks so much for stopping by. Really appreciate your support. We've gotten some pretty good traction on the last two videos, the Big Ten preview and then obviously the ACC preview as well. I highly recommend you check those out. Those were kind of more of a long form, looking deeper into each team. Today is going to be a shorter episode. We're going to be discussing all of the independent teams, primarily focusing obviously on the Tier 1 independent programs being Notre Dame and BYU. And then we're going to do like a 30,000-foot preview of the MAC, Conference USA, and Sun Belt. Listen, every year a team from one of those conferences knocks off some Power 5 team that you never saw coming out of the SEC, the Big 10, Big 12, wherever it might be. So we're going to try and dissect who might be the most talented teams, talk about a couple teams in each of those conferences that we think might have the best potential to pull off one of those wins. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, share this content with anyone who you think might find it interesting. And as always, I welcome your feedback. Can you believe it is just 1 week until the college football season? Can you feel it? I can definitely feel it. But the real question is, as the wise prophet Shaquille O'Neal once said, can you dig it? Why don't you send me your feedback? Let me know if you can dig it. We are 1 week out from college football. So like I said, we're going to be talking primarily about Notre Dame and BYU today. Other independents, we're going to spend a little time on Army, Liberty, and then, of course, the Sun Belt, MAC, and Conference USA. But like I said, let's kick things off with the top-tier independent programs out there. And in case you forgot, Notre Dame, still a very good football program. They finished the regular season last year 11-1 and ranked number 5 in the country. Just on the outside looking into the playoff, you might remember the 4th-ranked team in the country was Cincinnati. Well, Cincinnati beat Notre Dame earlier in the season, so that kind of created a wedge that they were never going to be able to get back into the playoff at that point. But check this out. In the last 5 seasons, the Irish have gone 10-3, 12-1, 11-2, 10-2, and 11-2 last year. They did face number 9 Oklahoma State in the Fiesta Bowl and narrowly lost 37-35. Now, it's reported that Notre Dame generated just over $115 million in football revenue last year. Now, obviously, if you've been watching the news at all, they were pursued again by the Big Ten. You know, a lot of talking heads were squawking about how, they had to join a conference after USC and UCLA joined the Big Ten. The reality is they are in no hurry. And with the kind of annual revenue that they have and the deal that they have with NBC, that really kind of gives them ammunition and leverage to stay independent. Now, it seems like forever ago, but Brian Kelly, the Irish's winningest head football coach, left South Bend to take the head coaching job at LSU. So next man up is Marcus Freeman. The new head coach was the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame last season. This defense has been top 40 in the country for 4 straight seasons. Now, you might remember, Brian Kelly made kind of a big display of trying to get the Irish offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees, to join him as he traveled down to LSU. But ultimately, Tommy Rees stayed in South Bend. I think that's going to be really important for Marcus Freeman as he builds the staff, but also a kind of a new culture there at Notre Dame. The offense also was top 40 in the country last year as well. Now, how did Freeman do on the recruiting trail? The Irish had the 9th best recruiting class in the country in 2021 under Kelly's last season at Notre Dame. In 2022, under Freeman, they had the 7th best recruiting class in the country. They signed 5-star linebacker Jalen Sneed out of South Carolina and 10 4-star recruits headlined by quarterback Steve Angeli out of New Jersey. They currently have the top recruiting class in the country for 2023. Now, Notre Dame really wasn't all that active in the transfer portal. They did lose a couple of 3-star pieces on the defense, but the big pickup was 4-star safety Brandon Joseph from Northwestern. They're really hopeful that Joseph is going to be able to help replace the talent lost by Kyle Hamilton going pro out of the secondary. Joseph was first-team All-Big Ten selection, so like I said, I think it's a big pickup. Now, let's talk about the 2022 roster. On the offense, the grad transfer Wisconsin quarterback Jack Cohn has gone pro, so begins the Tyler Buckner era in South Bend. Buckner is a true sophomore, and he threw for just 298 yards and had 3 touchdowns on 3 interceptions last season. None of that screams upgrade to me, but he was a 4-star recruit, the number 11 quarterback in the 2021 class, so that tells you that there's potential. He is very much a dual threat quarterback. I remember he had like a 68-yard touchdown run a year ago, but the passing has been suspect so far. Word out of Notre Dame is that he had a great offseason and that Tommy Rees is very happy with his progress. We will see. In the backfield, sophomores Chris Tyree and Logan Diggs are going to probably be splitting carries as the 1,000-yard rusher Kyron Williams has gone pro as well. There are 4 returning starters up front, but both tackles are just sophomores. Now, tight end Michael Mayer is on the preseason John Mackey Award watch list. He may be the best tight end in the country, but the rest of the skill position players are all pretty young as well. Your top 2 receiving targets, Lorenzo Styles and Jaden Thomas, are both just sophomores. Now, there's a ton of turnover on this offense, 6 starting sophomores. It may take some time to get things clicking. On the defense, though, almost 70% of last season's production is back. On the D-line, you return 2 starters, Jason Ademilola at D-tackle, and I think maybe my choice for frontrunner for the Chuck Bednarik Award in their Viper kind of edge position, Isaiah Foskey. Check this out. This dude had 11 sacks last year, and, oh, by the way, 6 forced fumbles. He is unanimously projected as a first-round draft pick in next year's NFL draft. But in come 2 new starters in Riley Mills and Jacob Lacey. They're both upperclassmen, so they should assimilate pretty well, but there's a few questions on the D-line. Now, 3 seniors make up your linebacking group in this 3-4 set, 2 of which are returning starters. Jack Kaiser at Rover had 2 forced fumbles, 2 interceptions last season, took both of those interceptions back for a touchdown, but he's not even the best piece in this group. That is the team's leading tackler from a year ago. J.D. Bertrand had 102 tackles in 2021. I think this front 7 is outstanding. If they can get the D-line shored up, this may be kind of a top 10 front 7 in the country. The secondary, though, is where you may have some concerns. This was a position group that was the weakest last season. They gave up almost 225 yards per game passing. And out goes, like I said, your All-American safety Kyle Hamilton to the pros. The 2022 group will be all upperclassmen, and you return 2 starters. But how much improvement have they made? Like I mentioned, I think the pickup of Brandon Joseph was crucial for this group. He had 79 tackles, 3 interceptions at Northwestern in 2021. I think he's really going to kind of be important in stabilizing this group this season. Ultimately, you have an absolute stud at every position group on this defense. This is a very senior and experienced bunch. Top 10 defense, I think, for sure. Looking over the schedule, you travel to, obviously out of the gate. What my numbers have is the number 1 team in the country to kick things off. I don't think this offense will be ready to hang in that one. Like I mentioned in the Big Ten preview, Ohio State is a little suspect on the D-line. So if Notre Dame can establish the run, they can give themselves a chance. My guess is Ohio State wins that ultimately by 2 touchdowns. Now, Notre Dame will win the next 3, but then you have that neutral site in Vegas against BYU, and that's certainly not going to be a cakewalk. 3 more easy wins, then the game I think that will determine their playoff destiny or potential. They host Clemson on November 5th. Remember now, the last time Clemson traveled to Notre Dame, the Irish hung 47 points on that perennial top 10 defense and sent the Tigers home with an overtime loss. With all the offensive issues at Clemson this year, the quarterback uncertainty, listen, I think Notre Dame can certainly win that game. Then 2 more wins before you travel to USC. Now, I've been on the record and said that I don't think SC is ready for the big time yet, but they're going to get a lot better as the season goes on. That could be a trap game. Notre Dame did not overlook USC at the end of the year. Ultimately, 10-2 is my call, for sure losing at Ohio State. And then they'll drop 1, I think, probably to BYU, Clemson, or SC. This is a really pretty impressive schedule. Now, speaking of BYU, man, these Cougars have really been reborn in the last couple of years. 11-1 in 2020, and then they were 10-2 last year heading into their bowl game. Now, they did lose the Independence Bowl to UAB, but that bowl game was so far beneath them. I think they just didn't get up for it. In the transfer portal, BYU wasn't very active as well, but they did pick up 4-star O-lineman Kingsley Suimataya from Oregon. Now, he's just a redshirt freshman, so that move was kind of more to prepare for the future. He's currently listed as second on the depth chart at both right tackle and left tackle, so they're going to be deep on the O-line this year. On the recruiting trail, they were 55th in the country for the 2022 class, signing 21 3-star and 2 big 4-star players, D lineman Asia Moa and wide receiver Cody Hagan, right out of their backyard there in Utah. Now, the AP has BYU ranked number 25, and the Coaches Poll doesn't have them ranked at all, which, really just blows my mind. This team returns the second most production in the nation, 88%. They return 80% of their offensive production, starting with quarterback Jaron Hall, who threw for 2,583 yards and 20 touchdowns last year to just 5 interceptions. Oh, by the way, he's mobile too. He had 307 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns as well. In front of Hall, you return all 5 starters from 2021 on the O-line. Freeland, Barrington, Pay, Tukuafu, and LaChance go an average of 6'7", 310. Monsters. And you only gave up 13 sacks last year. Now, your all-world running back, Tyler Algier, who was 3rd leading rusher in the country last year with 1,606 yards and a massive 23 touchdowns, he has gone pro. The replacement would have been a pretty serviceable piece in Lopini Katoa, but then in comes Cal transfer Christopher Brooks, who led the Bears in rushing in 2021. Algiers is a lot to replace, obviously, but I think some combo of these two behind that massive and experienced offensive line should work. As far as weapons in the passing game for Hall, well, you have big tight end Isaac Rex back. Now, he did have a season-ending knee injury last season, but in 2020, he had 429 yards, which you might say, oh, okay, that's pretty good for a tight end. He had 12 touchdown receptions. He is massive and huge for them in the red zone. If he's fully recovered, I think he can be a devastating weapon. And at wideout, your 2 leading receivers are back. Puka Nacua, who had 805 yards, and Gunnar Romney, who had 594 yards a year ago. I think this is certainly a top 20 offense in the nation. Now, this defense was 51st in the country, giving up just 24 points per game last season. Check this out, though. 97% of BYU's defensive production is back. That is number 1 in the country with a bullet. Up front on the D-line, the sophomore duo of Caden Hawes at nose tackle and Tyler Batty at D-end combined for 74 tackles, 5 sacks in 2021. Tuioti Mariner and Summers both played in more than half the games last season and had over 20 tackles apiece, so they're going to be serviceable replacements. Behind them, though, is the true strength of this unit. At linebacker, Peyton Wilgar had 57 tackles, 2 interceptions, and a forced fumble a year ago. And Will linebacker Ben Bywater, although he is just a sophomore, led the team in tackles last season with 102. You also have Keenan Peely, who is on the Bednarik watch list, And lest I forget to mention, Chaz Ayu at flash linebacker, all of those are returning starters and extremely solid in coverage and run support. To give you an idea of how strong this group is, Pepe Tanuvasa had 3 sacks last year, and he's going to be riding the bench in 2022. The run defense should be stout for the Cougs this year, but they were beat up a bit in the pass defense last year. And I don't think they really made any vital changes. 2 starting sophomores in this group, but the guy on your screen, free safety Malik Moore, and their nickel, Jacob Robinson, both came up with 3 interceptions last year. They are going to need to come up big in the pass game. Just like with Notre Dame, I mean, man, this is a tough schedule. You know, they're going to route South Florida to start things off, but then number 10 Baylor and at number 11 Oregon back-to-back. You then get 2 easy wins and then another tremendously difficult back-to-back. Number 5 Notre Dame in Vegas, and then you host number 19 Arkansas. And, you know, can I digress for a moment here? I just find it hilarious that you have a traditional Catholic school playing a traditional Mormon school in Sin City, and they're both tremendously great football teams. I mean, you might see some transcendental plays, or the earth might just open up and swallow everyone whole. Who knows? You're going to want to tune in for that one, though. I think it's going to be a great matchup. Now back to the schedule. Looking past that the Arkansas game, the last 5 I think are all wins. Guaranteed 8 wins here. Really, the only team I think that they can't beat is Notre Dame. Baylor could fall off. They are 98th in returning production, and Arkansas might have just been a flash in the pan. Their best running back transferred, as you're going to hear about here in a minute. Oregon has a brand new coaching staff, and obviously Bo Nix at quarterback, who is uniquely known for coming up short in big games. You know, 11-1 I think is certainly possible. Let me just say this, though. If either of these teams, Notre Dame or BYU, given the difficulty of their schedule, go undefeated, they absolutely belong in the college football playoff. So now let's take a look. Here are all the FBS independent teams in the country. We just discussed Notre Dame and BYU. I have both of them as top 15 teams in the country. You can see I give Army a bit of a nod over Liberty. And then, as we're going to talk about in a second, New Mexico State, Massachusetts, and Connecticut are just atrocious. But let's start with a quick little bit about Army. Listen, the Black Knights finished the season 9-4 with a bowl win over Missouri last season, but they returned only 53% on offense. You have a brand new starting quarterback, Tyre Tyler, who threw for just 79 yards total in 2021. Now, you might say, Tyson, it's a military academy. They run the ball. They basically never pass, which is almost entirely true. But the Black Knights also said goodbye to their leading rusher in the offseason. The Knights, on the positive side, the Knights committed just 50 penalties last season. That was the 3rd fewest in the country, and they also had the 3rd fewest turnovers in the country. So this is an incredibly well-disciplined team for Jeff Monken. This team's not going to beat themselves, but there's just not a lot of talent here. Now let's look at the schedule. They could lose their first 2. Those are going to be real toss-ups, and they'll for sure lose at Wake Forest. But this is, I've got to say, a stupid easy schedule. 8-4 again in 2022 for Army. Now the Liberty Flames, last season, it was a bit down from the 11-1 record they had in 2020, but they still went 8-5. You know, I think Hugh Freeze has really kind of built a culture here. So the headline is starting quarterback Malik Willis has gone pro. Well, in comes journeyman quarterback transfer Charlie Brewer. You may remember him from playing like the first 3 games at Utah last year, and before everybody just completely forgot about him because Cam Rising is the truth. And then before that, he played at Baylor. Well, like Willis, he's kind of hoping to recreate his image at Liberty. He was a highly touted recruit out of high school. Unfortunately for him, though, the Flames are bottom 10 in the nation in returning production. Starting running back TJ Green is back, and you picked up a transfer wideout Caleb Snead to join your leading receiver from last season, Demario Douglas. You know, I mean, there are some pieces, but this is really going to take some time. And I don't know, character-wise, if Brewer has the patience for this. So UAB, Wake, Arkansas, and BYU are all losses for sure. 8-4 is possible, maybe more like 7-5 in 2022. Now on to our last three independent teams. New Mexico State's defense in 2021 was 127th in the country in total yards given up, and they returned just 31% on offense. Yikes. They did, however, kick our next team's ass at the end of the season last year, 44-27. That team, the UMass Minutemen, UMass was 123rd in the country in total offense last year and 125th in the country in total defense. 11 of their projected starters for 2022 are sophomores, including all 5 offensive linemen. Now, if you think that was bad, it could certainly get worse. UConn was 128th in the country in total offense. Only 2 teams in the country had a worse offense than UConn. And you guessed it, Colorado and New Mexico. But get back to these independent teams. These are certainly the 3 worst teams in the country, I believe. Absolute maximum wins for each of these teams is 2 and 10. And you might say, well, why would they win any games? Because they play each other and they each play an FCS team. So now let's move on to the Sun Belt Conference. We'll start here in the East Division. This is where I think you have most of the talented teams. We're going to talk about 3 teams here, those being Coastal Carolina, Appalachian State, and the Marshall Thundering Herd, who joined the Sun Belt from Conference USA this year. Also, if you look down at number 7, James Madison was an FCS program a year ago. This is their first year coming up to the FBS Division I level. But let's start with Coastal Carolina. You know, it really shocked me that Jamie Chadwell didn't go after a better job this offseason. This is a program that started playing Division I football in 2017. And in the last 2 seasons, they're 22-3. Now, the mullet himself, Grayson McCall, is back at quarterback for the Chanticleers. McCall had the best QBR in the country by 25 points last year. And in the last 2 seasons, he's passed for 5,300 yards, almost 5,400 yards, and 53 touchdowns to just 6 interceptions. This dude is a real diamond in the rough. Your 1,000-yard running back and 2 leading receivers went pro, though. But they brought in Sam Pinckney from Georgia State, who was kind of a real up-and-coming wide receiver, 815 yards, 7 touchdowns in 2020. But he was limited last year with injuries. On the defensive side of the ball, sophomore DN Josiah Stewart is the preseason Defensive Player of the Year in the Sun Belt. Stewart had 12.5 sacks and 3 forced fumbles last year as a freshman. This dude is an absolute stud. Outside of him, though, I think the cupboard's pretty bare here. They return just 30% of their defensive production. Let's look at the schedule here. Army will be tough, but it's at home, so they should pull that win off. And then you have a tough back-to-back at the end of October at Marshall and App State, but you avoid Louisiana again. This is another kind of stupid easy schedule. I think Coastal's going to win 11 games again. Now on to the Appalachian State Mountaineers. Now App State moved up to the FBS level in 2014. Every season since 2015, they've won 9 or more games. I mean, that's just incredible. In 2022, their starting quarterback, Chase Bryce, is back. And this dude, the running back, Cameron Peoples, is first-team All-Sun Belt. He's really pretty special. He had almost 1,000 yards and 14 touchdowns on the ground last year. My numbers have the Mountaineers defense as a top 30 unit in the country. This is a really pretty talented team, but this schedule is brutal for them. North Carolina week 1 is really a toss-up. Then they'll get crushed at Texas A&M. And you're at Marshall and Coastal Carolina. I mean, odds are they'll get 9 wins. I guess I agree. 9-3 for App State. Now, Marshall, the Thundering Herd's starting quarterback, Grant Wells, was pretty special last year, and others noticed it as well because he transferred to Virginia Tech. So in comes Texas Tech transfer Henry Columby at the quarterback position. The passing game is going to be suspect, but Marshall rushed for 162 yards last year per game, and they have 4 starting O-linemen, and this dude on your screen, running back Rasheen Ali, are all back for the 2022 campaign. Now, flipping to the defensive side of the ball, this was a top 50 scoring defense in the nation last year. Their leading two tacklers, Abraham Beauplain and Eli Neal, are both back in this impressive linebacking group. This schedule is much softer than Appalachian State's. You get both App State and Coastal at home. After going 7-6 a year ago, I mean, these guys could pretty easily go 9-3. Now, let's move over to the Sun Belt West Division. And there's really only one team, I think, that is worthy of discussing on this side of the conference, and that's Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns, the conference champions from a year ago. If any team rivals them to win this division, it would be South Alabama, who has some talent, but they're very young. I don't see that happening. Now, Louisiana head coach Billy Napier took the head coaching job at Florida, and the Ragin' Cajuns returned the 126th least production from a year ago. Starting quarterback Levi Lewis went pro, and so in steps first-time starter sophomore Chandler Fields, who threw, check this out, just 13 passes all of last year. I mean, yikes. You do return your leading rusher in Chris Smith and your top two receivers in Jefferson and LeBlanc, but they're going to have three sophomore first-time starters on the O-line. On the defense, at left end, Andre Jones had 60 tackles, 6 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles in 2021. And your other D-end, Zion Hill-Green, is a first-team all-conference. I think this D-line is going to be able to get some pressure and disrupt offenses, but the rest of the defense is not super overwhelming. This schedule is also stupid easy. You avoid Coastal, App State, and Georgia State. You're at Marshall and Florida State. Those are both losses, but you could win all the others. I mean, this team could go 9-3 as well. Now, one last dude I want to talk to you about in this conference before we move on. Unfortunately, plays for a terrible team, the Troy Trojans. But this dude, Carlton Marshall, this linebacker has 443 career tackles. He is just 91 tackles away from becoming the all-time tackles leader in the history of college football. The current all-time tackles leader is Boston College's Luke Kuechly at 532. If you're wondering whether he might have a chance to get there, Marshall had over 100 tackles in each of the last 3 seasons, and he had 126 last year. I think this dude's going to break this record. Now let's move on to the MAC. This is, I think, probably the weakest conference in all of college football. Yeah, just looking over their schedules, I mean, the team out of the East Division that got a berth into the conference championship game won just 7 games. Okay, so we're just going to talk about 2 teams on the East Division, that being the Miami of Ohio Redhawks, who I have picked to win the division, and Kent State Golden Flashes. Now, Miami, Ohio finished just 7-6 last year, but they do return 76% on offense heading into 2022. Your starting quarterback, Brett Gabbert, returns and is a first-team all-conference selection. The O-line has a couple of solid spots. Center Rusty Feth is first-team all-conference as well. And next to him, the left guard, Caleb Schaefer, is second-team. This defense was 52nd in the country in total defense last year. And your team leader, linebacker Matthew Solopek, is back. So the defense should be serviceable. Solopek had 112 tackles last year. That's pretty impressive. So let's move on to the schedule. So loss, win, loss. They really probably should beat Northwestern. I have them as a more talented team than Northwestern. You get Kent State at home, but have to travel to Northern Illinois, who I think is the best team in this conference. I'll give them 8-4 this year. Now, Kent State went 7-7 last season, but they only lost 1 game at home. That's kind of a weird situation. The home field advantage must be real up there in Kent, Ohio. This division, as I mentioned, is very watered down, but Kent State has a couple of good pieces on offense. Brand new quarterback in Colin Shalee, but this dude, Marcus Cooper, is first-team All-MAC. He went for 1,200 yards and 11 touchdowns last year. Yeah, wide receiver Dante Cephas also had 1,200 yards receiving. So, they're going to need to score a lot, though, because this is not a good defense. I'm looking over the schedule here. I think probably 7-5 is the ceiling for the Golden Flash. Now in the West Division, like I mentioned, my numbers say the most talented team is Northern Illinois. So we're going to talk about them real quick, and Central Michigan's Chippewas. Now, this is definitely the best and most talented team in the MAC. Top 10 in the country in returning production. Okay, let me see if I can run through all of this real quick. On offense, wide receiver Trayvon Rudolph and 2 linemen, Nolan Potter and Logan Jernsternitz, our first team All-MAC. You're returning starting quarterback Rocky Lombardi. You may remember the name. He played a couple years ago at Michigan State. And your starting tailback Harrison Wiley, our second team All-MAC as well. This offense was top 50 in the country in yards per game in 2021. Oh, yes, and their kicker is a first-team all-conference selection as well. On the defense, the secondary is loaded. Cornerback Jordan Gandy and safety C.J. Brown both got first-team honors as well. Brown led the team last year with 107 tackles, but this is kind of an obscure thing. The Huskies only got 3 interceptions as a team all of last year. So I've got to think that that's going to regress or progress back towards the mean, right? And so they should be getting more interceptions this year. Sophomore nose tackle James Esther was a second-team selection as well up front. Looking over the schedule, Northern Illinois, I think, could finish anywhere from 8-4 to 10-2, really. Now, Central Michigan Chippewas finished last season 9-4 with a bowl win over Washington State. Way to go, Pac-12, or Pac-10 now, I guess. They only lost 2 conference games, though, at Miami and at home to Northern Illinois. Your starting quarterback, Daniel Richardson, is back. And, he had pretty decent numbers last season as a freshman. But this dude, running back Lou Nichols III, led the nation in rushing in 2021 with 1,710 yards. Now, with that being said, you do have 3 new starters on the O-line, one of which is a freshman. Wide receiver Dallas Dixon is his second team all-conference selection. So, there's a little hit or miss on the offense, but this defense is really going to struggle. They returned just 52% from a group that gave up almost 400 yards per game a year ago. I think there's going to be a bit of a drop-off this year for these guys. Ceiling is probably 7 wins. Now let's wrap things up here with our final conference, and that is Conference USA. They got pilfered by the Sun Belt. Several teams left Conference USA for the Sun Belt in the offseason, so they no longer have divisions. It's just a straight-up 11-team. Top 2 teams will play for the conference championship. And in this conference, I just want to talk about 2 teams. Western Kentucky did have the most prolific offensive passing attack in the country last year, but your starting quarterback, Bailey Zappi, has gone pro. And your second leading receiver, I think Western Kentucky is going to regress quite a bit. But UTSA and UAB are the 2 teams I want to talk about. Of all the teams we're talking about today, I really think only Notre Dame and BYU are more talented than this UTSA Roadrunners bunch. They are top 25 in the country in returning production. Here's a quick runoff. First team all-conference. Quarterback Frank Harris is back. Wide receiver Zachary Franklin. And center Ahofitu Maka on the O-line are all back. This receiving group with Franklin and Cephas is electric. But obviously the straw that stirred the drink, running back Sincere McCormick has gone pro. So in comes Arkansas's leading running back from last year, Traylon Smith, and the absolute biggest transfer pickup in this conference last offseason. 87% of offensive production is back. It's, I think, run it back time for Jeff Traylor's bunch on offense in 2022. Now on the defense, their top 4 tacklers from 2021 are all back. This D-line was reinforced with 6'1", 305 D tackle Joseph Evans, who transferred in from LSU, another SEC player transferring in. Jamal Legion and Trevor Harmonson are back in a pretty strong linebacking group. They combined for 120 tackles a year ago. And this secondary is stacked. Cornerback Corey Mayfield and safety Rashad Wisdom are first-team all-conference. Remember that name, Rashad Wisdom. He is absolutely going to be a pro. Now, listen, if you're picking up transfers from Arkansas and LSU, I think Traylor's really built something here. But the schedule's pretty tough. You're going to lose, I think, probably to Houston and then at Texas. I would keep my eye on that game. We were talking about at the outset of this episode, a team from one of these conferences that might knock off a Power 5 big name. Hey, UTSA might roll into Austin and knock off Texas. You heard it here first, okay? But the 2 big games I think here are going to be at Army and at UAB. I think if they can win those, which they should, you're looking at 10-2, if not 8-4. Now, speaking of UAB, this Blazers group is a team that I am very high on, off of their Independence Bowl win over BYU last year and a lot of the moves they've made in the offseason. UAB has some real gifted weapons on the offense in first-team all-conference running back Dwayne McBride and the wide receiver Jermaine Brown Jr. You have 2 first-team all-conference USA O-linemen in Sidney Wells and Matthew Treherne at right tackle and right guard. Starting quarterback Dylan Hopkins is back as well for this offense, and they scored 30 points or more in 8 games last year, including that win I mentioned over BYU in the bowl game. Now, linebacker Noah Wilder and D-back Starling Thomas V are both the first-team all-conference on this defense. Wilder led the team in tackles with 93 a year ago. You're returning almost 70% of their production from last year. I think this is a top 25 defense according to my numbers. Now, this schedule at Liberty, week 2 will be kind of an early test. You're also at Western Kentucky. Like I said, I think they'll regress a bit. And you get UTSA at home on November 5th. I think that's going to be for the conference title, really. It's going to come down to whether Hopkins at quarterback can limit the turnovers. But, the Blazers, I think, also are going to finish somewhere between 8-4 and 10-2. So that concludes our team previews for the independent programs for the MAC, Conference USA, and Sun Belt. So let's go ahead and let's wrap things up here with kind of a big picture view of the biggest games on the scheduled slate for this season. Let's start with our Tier 1 independent programs, that being Notre Dame and BYU. Saturday, September 3rd, I mentioned Notre Dame, number 5 in the country, travels to Columbus to play number 2 Ohio State. Then the very next weekend, number 10 Baylor at BYU. And then 1 week later after that, on Saturday, September 17th, BYU travels to Oregon. That big primetime BYU Notre Dame showdown in Vegas is going to be on October 8th. And then at the back end of the calendar, the game that I think is going to – one of these teams will likely make the playoff. You have Clemson at Notre Dame. Now, from those other conferences, those other independent programs, let's look and see if there might be some fun games that go under the radar that we might enjoy watching. First and foremost, on September 3rd, Houston traveling to UT San Antonio. These are 2 non-Power 5 teams that I'm very, very high on. That same day, North Carolina travels to Appalachian State in what is really kind of a trap game for the Tar Heels. I hope Mac Brown and North Carolina are prepared because App State can sneak up and get you. Then the next weekend, September 10th, UT San Antonio at Army, 2 teams we talked about today. On October 12th, Louisiana plays at Marshall. And then November 3rd, App State at Coastal Carolina. I think that game's probably going to determine who wins the Sun Belt Conference. And then Saturday, November 5th, UT San Antonio at UAB. I think the best game out of the MAC this upcoming year is going to be on Wednesday, November 16th, Miami of Ohio at Northern Illinois. So anyways, we made it through all of those teams, all of those conferences. As always, send me your feedback at RightOnQCS on Twitter. RightOnQCS@gmail.com is the email. I'm always going through those, trying to get back to you on your feedback. I very much appreciate it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share this content with anyone you think might find it interesting. We have one more conference to preview, and we've got 1 week to get it done in, and that is the SEC Conference. So anyways, you have been watching Right on Cue College Sports. I very much appreciate all your support. I'm your host, Tyson Quiller, and we will get at you next time.